The castle is heavily guarded, with sentries stationed at every corner. From atop a towering tree, a lone figure watches in silence, a man driven solely by vengeance for his fallen clan. Without hesitation, he infiltrates the demonic sect's territory and eliminates a sentry. Knowing the disappearance will soon be discovered, he quickly advances deeper into the stronghold. At the heart of the sect, the leader, known as the Heavenly Demon, sits calmly in meditation. One by one, his subordinates fall, yet he remains completely unfazed. To him, such losses are insignificant distractions on the path to martial supremacy. Soon, the Avenger finally arrives after taking down every obstacle in his way. His name is Kong Wenshin, and he has come to personally end the Heavenly Demon's life. A fierce battle begins instantly, but the Heavenly Demon proves overwhelmingly powerful. Even so, Kong refuses to fall easily. With a fierce strike fueled by rage, he manages to break through the demon's steel-like defense and land a solid hit. Declaring that he carries the wrath of countless victims, Kong continues to fight with everything he has. However, the Heavenly Demon, far from defeated, chooses to push his limits further. He consumes an entire bottle of elixir, triggering a dangerous demonic chi deviation that drastically amplifies his strength. Now radiating overwhelming power, his mere presence is enough to make Kong tremble. As the Heavenly Demon prepares to deliver a fatal blow, a mysterious barrier suddenly appears, blocking the attack at the last moment. The one who intervenes is a great mage who claims to have come from another world, an unexpected twist that completely disrupts the traditional Muram setting. This bizarre development leaves Jean, the reader of the story, feeling unimpressed and confused, making him lose interest in the novel altogether. Shifting to reality, we learn about Jean, a 23-year-old who was discharged from military service 6 months ago and is now preparing to return to college. Although he once had a clear plan to earn certifications and focus on his studies, he gradually drifted away after realizing how much of normal life he had missed. As a fan of Muram stories, Jean often found himself immersed in fantasies of becoming a protagonist in such a world. During his service, he casually played a game called Loyal Ground, but after his discharge, he began taking it seriously. Within just 3 months, Jean climbed to become a top 10 ranked player, even earning small amounts of money through internet cafe tournaments. The game features a survival format where 100 players drop into a map, gather weapons, and compete until only one remains. In one match, Jean teams up with a friend and quickly eliminates 2 opponents. As the number of players dwindles, Jean chooses a cautious approach, focusing on survival until the final safe zone. Eventually, they discover an unlooted house, but his teammate rushes in recklessly and falls into a trap, getting eliminated. Despite this, Jean stays composed, defeats the final opponent, and secures victory. Although tempted to continue playing, Jean checks the time and decides to start focusing on his studies from the next day. Shortly after, he receives a message from his mother regarding his academy fees and some additional money. Feeling a sense of guilt, Jean informs his teammate that he will stop playing and begin attending an English academy. Later that night, Jean returns to his apartment and scrolls through videos online, coming across a mysterious clip about unusual figures spotted overseas. However, the video is abruptly deleted, leaving him puzzled. Brushing it off, he goes to sleep. The next morning, Jean gets ready for his first day at the academy. However, his gaming partner once again asks for help with a clan war. Jean agrees to assist one last time, but in that very moment, a strange purple light appears behind him. Confused, he turns to look, only for the light to intensify rapidly. Within seconds, the glow engulfs him completely, and Jean vanishes without a trace. At first, Jean can't see anything at all, leaving him wondering if this is some kind of punishment for neglecting his studies. However, the darkness suddenly fades, revealing a bright sky and a crowd of people dressed in elaborate, costume-like outfits. As he regains consciousness, Jean questions whether he is dreaming. Looking around, he notices that everyone is gathered in front of a strange statue. Without warning, a voice echoes in their minds, announcing that 100 players have been detected. The statue's eyes glow blue as the system initializes, followed by a complete language synchronization that allows everyone to understand one another. Tension quickly rises among the group. Some people demand answers, others accuse each other, and arguments break out. One elf even launches an attack on another person, but despite the strike landing, the target feels no pain. This only convinces the elf that the man might be responsible for bringing them here. Observing the chaos, Jean realizes the situation feels far too realistic to be a dream. Moments later, the system announces the start of the game. The difficulty is set to easy, and the objective is to rank within the top 90 players. The selected map is the capital of the King Kingdom, and rewards will be granted to those who place in the top 10. The system also clarifies that all attacks in the waiting area are neutralized, preventing any real harm for now. A detailed map appears before each participant, followed by an explanation for first-time players of Cloyd Survival. The game will last 100 days, with the playable area shrinking each day. Leaving the designated zone will result in serious consequences, so players must remain cautious. The match will continue until only one survivor remains. Those eliminated, or those who complete the game, will return to their original world. However, anyone who fails to reach the top 90 will lose the opportunity to participate again. The system then announces that players will soon descend to their chosen locations using Gaze, where they can gather items to improve their chances of survival. Hearing all this, Jean is stunned, initially believing he is simply dreaming about a game similar to Loyal Ground. Yet the realism and presence of others make him uneasy. Even if this is a dream, he has no intention of losing his life. As Jean contemplates his survival, a man in armor approaches him, questioning why he keeps looking around and demanding to know where he is from. Before Jean can respond, the system announces that the game will begin in 3 seconds. Jean smirks, and just before the countdown ends, he taunts the man, confident that his experience and knowledge of similar games will give him the upper hand. The provocation angers the man, but the match begins immediately. In an instant, all players are lifted into the air and transported toward their selected locations. Many choose to descend into crowded areas filled with valuable items, but Jean decides to land on the outskirts, prioritizing safety over risk. Upon landing, he feels intense motion sickness but pushes through it and heads toward a nearby house, hoping to secure a weapon before encountering any enemies. As he approaches, he hears a suspicious noise and quickly rushes inside, shutting the door behind him. Exhausted, he briefly worries that the sword-wielding man from earlier might have followed him. After checking through the window and finding no one, he assumes it was just the wind and begins searching the house. While exploring, Jean accidentally kicks into a heavy crossbow on the floor. Though difficult to handle, he recognizes it as a valuable find. The moment he equips it, knowledge of how to use it naturally flows into his mind. Drawing from his military experience, he tests the weapon, but the powerful recoil sends him stumbling back into the wall. Despite the surprise, he realizes how effective the crossbow could be once mastered. After searching the house further and finding nothing else useful, Jean heads outside to explore more buildings. With no enemies in sight, he takes the opportunity to gather resources safely. Entering another house, he carefully scans the area before spotting a scroll. Curious, he picks it up and learns that it is a healing scroll capable of restoring injuries when activated. Pleased with the discovery, Jean hopes to find more recovery items, and possibly an item bag. Continuing his search, he notices a faint purple glow coming from a nearby library. Investigating further, he discovers a martial arts manual titled Black Starchy Palms, an ability that allows the user to project hidden weapons through their fingers. The system prompts him to confirm whether he wants to learn it, and Jean immediately agrees. At once, the book rises into the air, its pages flipping rapidly before dissolving into fragments of light. These fragments flow into Jin's fingers, and he feels a noticeable change in his hands. To test his new ability, he picks up a fork and throws it toward the wall. The fork embeds itself firmly into the surface, demonstrating the power of his newly acquired skill, leaving Jean both surprised and excited as he takes his first real step. Jean couldn't help but feel excited. If martial arts books exist in this survival game, then magic books must exist too. Despite this, he's certain that Cloyd Survival is just another version of Loyal Ground. Having collected all the loot in the house, Jean decides it's time to move on. The sun has already risen, and he needs to find a safe place quickly. While exploring, he comes across a house with its lights on. In a game like this, that could mean only two things. Either a rare item is hidden inside, or another player is present. Jean proceeds cautiously, knowing he has no idea how many others landed nearby. Whoever is inside could be a complete novice or a master. Positioning himself stealthily at the base of the stairs leading to the second floor, Jean prepares to strike using his crossbow and newly learned black starchy palms. Even if his opponent is skilled, he feels he has a fighting chance. Sweat drips from his brow as he climbs the stairs one careful step at a time, minimizing noise and planning to attack from every angle. But when he reaches the second floor, he finds nothing, just a single lantern on a table by the door. Sensing a possible trap, Jean kicks the door open, yet the room remains empty. He inspects it thoroughly and realizes he's put on a show for nothing, but at least no one else is there. On the table with the lantern, Jean opens a drawer and discovers a ring, the Ring of Strength, an item that boosts the wearer's strength by 20 points. He equips it immediately and feels his body lighten, making the heavy crossbow much easier to handle. Curious about the exact stats, Jean opens his status panel. Although his numbers still seem modest, he's officially classified as a martial artist thanks to the skills he learned from the book, a huge improvement from when he started. Thrilled by his progress, he heads downstairs to continue looting. There, he finds another item, a subspace ring, which allows the user to store and retrieve items from a pocket dimension. Once equipped, the system explains how it works. By saying or thinking the word subspace, the user opens the portal, then touches the ring and thinks of the item they want to retrieve. Essentially, it functions like a portable inventory, replacing the need for a backpack. Jean tests it out, awkward at first, but surprisingly convenient. Despite everything feeling so unreal, Jean can't help but wish he could bring all these items, martial arts, and powers back into the real world. To check on the progress of other players, he opens the kill log and notices that only one person has been eliminated so far. Proof that the game is just beginning, and survival will be far from easy. Jean had planned to farm until only 90 players remained, but exploring houses had already netted him a wealth of consumable items. He was even lucky enough to find several hidden weapons, perfect for combining with his black starchy palms. He debated whether to move immediately or wait until sunrise, knowing that the strong players he had seen in the waiting room were most dangerous under the cover of darkness. At his current level, he couldn't take them head-on, but if he survived and climbed into the top 10, he could start allocating points effectively, just like today. With that in mind, he decided to loot one more house under the safety of night, when fewer players were active. As he moved, Jean noticed he wasn't even tired, a testament to the incredible power granted by the Ring of Strength. Yet, despite his enhanced strength, he still felt hunger and thirst, a stark reminder that Cloyd's survival mirrored reality in many ways. Starving, he wondered if he could find food in the city and began heading into the forest. According to his map, the city should be nearby, but no buildings were in sight. Suddenly, a low growl pierced the silence. Instinctively, Jean dove behind a tree, his heart racing. The sound wasn't human, it came from a werewolf. Two of them were prowling the forest, and one quickly spotted him, launching an attack. Jean narrowly dodged, stunned that monsters like these existed in the game. Panic surged as he bolted through the forest, cursing himself for not expecting such threats. Pride fueled his sprint. At last, he spotted a house in the forest and dashed inside, slamming the door shut. But the werewolves weren't so easily deterred. Peeking outside, he saw them sniffing around, trying to track his scent. Deciding to strike first, Jean drew his heavy crossbow and eliminated one werewolf with a single-handed shot, thanks to the Ring of Strength. Only one remained. Before Jean could aim, the second werewolf had already detected him and lunged. He barely evaded the attack and fled for a safe distance. This one proved smarter than the first, blocking his crossbow shots with its foot and counterattacking fiercely. On the verge of death, Jean refused to give up. He opened his subspace ring, pulled out a dagger, and unleashed his black starchy palms. The strike connected perfectly, finally killing the werewolf. Breathing heavily, Jean muttered to himself, "I can't afford to lose to a mere underling." Jean finally allowed himself a breath of relief after the intense battle with the werewolf. Thanks to the stash of throwing daggers he had prepared earlier, he was able to eliminate the creature efficiently. Once the threat was gone, Jean noticed a mob drop on the ground. It turned out to be simple food. He ate it to restore his energy, then scanned his surroundings and discovered a piece of armor resembling the bulletproof vests from Loyal Ground. Though initially large, the armor, named the orichalcum breastplate, magically adjusted to Jin's body and significantly increased his resistance to both wind and fire magic. Opening his stats panel, he was amazed by the boost to his attributes. As he continued exploring, his knee accidentally hit something hidden. Picking it up triggered a system notification. It was a night cloak. When equipped, staying still in darkness rendered Jean completely invisible. Magic detection would fail, and even the sounds he made were suppressed entirely. Jean was thrilled. This item was perfect for surviving undetected during nighttime, allowing him to avoid confrontations entirely. Feeling confident, Jean realized the mysterious house in the middle of nowhere had actually been a prime farming spot. Luck seemed to favor him as he ventured into the forest again on the second day. Hours passed without incident, and Jean began to wonder if he had landed in a random, uneventful location. Suddenly, he heard rapid footsteps approaching and instinctively hid to observe and plan his next move. He saw a man sprinting frantically, clearly fleeing from a mage while cursing himself for a previous action. After a short distance, the man stopped and muttered to himself. Jean prepared to attack, thinking the man looked weak enough to handle. Yet, no matter how he tried to pull the trigger, he couldn't convince himself that anyone here could actually die. After all, this still felt like a game. Before he could decide, the pursuing mage appeared. The moment the mage locked onto the black-haired man, he struck, and the man was instantly killed. Jean stayed hidden, carefully observing what happened next. To his relief, there was no remains, only a chest where the man had fallen. This confirmed to Jean that everyone here was indeed inside a game. The chest would contain the fallen player's items, but the source of the mage's attack still puzzled him. As Jean scanned the area, he noticed the mage now standing right beside him. Bragging about his own strength, the mage turned toward the chest to claim the fallen player's items. Watching this unfold, Jean realized the harsh truth. The person who had died was a player just like him. If he hesitated too long, he could easily become the next target, and someone else would rise in rank by eliminating him. Survival in this game depended on making swift decisions, and Jean knew he couldn't afford to wait. Realizing that survival meant taking the initiative, Jean decided to strike first. However, the mage had already cast a barrier, which blocked his initial arrow and alerted him to Jin's presence. Frustrated by the disruption, the mage tried to remain calm, but Jean quickly attacked again, only to find the barrier still holding strong. Seeing his barrier under pressure, the mage panicked slightly and began casting attacks at random locations, thinking the enemy was nearby, though there was no one there. Seizing the opportunity, Jean attacked from a different angle, finally shattering the barrier into pieces. Landing on the ground, he was spotted by the mage, who immediately tried to counterattack. Acting swiftly, Jean struck back with a dagger using black star chi palms, eliminating the mage. A chest appeared where the mage fell, signaling loot had dropped. Knowing that lingering could be dangerous if other players arrived, Jean decided to loot quickly and move. From the mage's chest, he collected gloves, a medium healing scroll, and Urko's necklace, a pure gold item marking the wearer as a mage from the Escrow Magic Society. While Jean didn't dwell on the necklace, he decided to stash it for now. From the fallen player's chest, he also acquired a circle stone, which allowed him to engrave a magical circle over his heart to use mana and learn a spell. Jean realized this explained why the other player had been running. He had been trying to safely activate the stone. Determined to make full use of it, Jean stored the rest of the loot in his subspace ring for safety and set out to find a suitable location to activate the circle's stone. After locating an isolated house, he used the stone. The system warned him that during the process, he would remain completely motionless for 3 hours, unable to perform any other actions or use items, and would feel slight pain as the circle formed. Suppressing his screams, Jean endured the next 3 hours in intense discomfort. Martial arts had been relatively easy to learn, but mastering magic proved excruciating. When the circle was complete, Jean checked his status panel and discovered he now had 2 jobs, with mana at 30. Curious about the current state of the game, he opened the kill log. Shockingly, he saw that around 55 players had died since last night, and all of them had been eliminated by a single player, Nam Sagwon. Rewinding a few hours, Nam had been ruthlessly hunting down other players, showing no mercy even to those begging to remain in the top 90. His goal was clear. Every participant needed to know the name Nam and fear it. It was now day 3 of Cloyd's survival, and Jean sat quietly, reflecting on the notorious player Nam, who had defeated dozens of participants in a single night. Jean hoped to avoid crossing paths with him, but a thought struck him. If Nam continued dominating the game, it might actually increase Jin's chances of reaching the top 10. After all, the organizers had announced special rewards for those who achieved that rank. Jean speculated that the prize could include money, rare items, or even the ability to bring skills and items acquired in the game back into the real world. Calming his mind, Jean finished testing his newly learned magic. He could now see mana flow through his hands, a visual confirmation of his growing power. To further practice, he pulled out the wind ball magic book he had looted the day before. The book allowed him to create spheres of wind, with the number of spheres increasing alongside his power. Jean concentrated and cast the spell, producing 4 small wind balls. Initially disappointed by their size, he threw them and was instantly shocked. The spheres tore through a wall and revealing the immense destructive power he now wielded. Exhausted, he felt his mana completely depleted, forcing him to pause. As time passed, the restricted zone began appearing on the map, gradually shrinking the playable area. Jean decided to farm along the edges of the boundary, minimizing the risk of running into enemies. While moving cautiously through a town, he noticed an old man spying on him, seemingly intrigued by his actions. The man jumped down and began following Jean from a distance. Hours later, Jean reached a cluster of houses where the streets were littered with open chests. Sensing movement, he quickly threw a wind ball toward the source, but found no one. After the dust settled, he heard movements inside one of the houses, likely an injured player. Recognizing the danger of confronting someone who had survived this long, prioritizing his own survival instead, he donned his night cloak and moved toward the forest. Unaware of Jin's true position, the injured player cautiously stepped outside, taking a deep breath of relief. He believed he was safe, having avoided immediate detection. Confident in his survival, the player began looting the open chests. That's when Jin executed his plan. With perfect timing, he aimed his heavy crossbow and eliminated the unsuspecting player. It turned out Jin had used a clever strategy, luring the player out of hiding to ensure an easy kill while staying safe himself. Jin decided to loot the chest before moving toward the edges of the safe zone. But suddenly, the old man who had been following him appeared behind him, complimenting Jin on his skills. Startled and scared, Jin instinctively tried to run, but the old man quickly reassured him. He wasn't there to harm Jin. He only had a few questions. Jin cautiously tried to extract information, but the old man brushed it off, saying it didn't matter even if he told Jin. They were from different worlds. Despite this, Jin remained wary and hesitant, unsure of the man's intentions. The old man then asked if Jin had participated in anything like this before. He revealed that he had been observing Jin for some time and was impressed by how quickly Jin had adapted. From that, the old man deduced that Jin must realize this wasn't a real world. Jin was shocked. He hadn't even noticed the old man watching him and wondered how long he had been observing him. He admitted that while this was his first time in this world, he had played a similar game in his own world. Surprisingly, the old man had no concept of a game and found the idea fascinating. As the sun began to set and the moon appeared in the sky, the old man asked Jin if his world had a moon as large as this one. Jin explained that moons in both their worlds were smaller. Curious, the old man asked him to explain the game he had mentioned. Fearing an ambush in their current location, Jin suggested moving elsewhere, but the old man ignored him, grabbing him and warning him to stay silent. Otherwise, he would become a target for others. Then, with astonishing agility, the old man began leaping from branch to branch, carrying Jin along. At that moment, Jin had no idea what consequences this encounter might bring. Eventually, the old man took Jin to the tallest tree, where Jin explained the games from his world. Listening carefully, the old man commented that Jin's world sounded magical, But Jean corrected him. It wasn't magic, just a highly advanced civilization. The old man nodded, finally understanding why Jean had adapted to this survival game so quickly. Jean couldn't help but wonder how long the old man had been observing him. Like a reader following a story, the old man replied that he had been watching Jean from the moment he had been dropped onto the map. He had originally planned to enjoy the fresh mountain air for the next 100 days, but had grown curious about Jin's actions and decided to approach him. The old man assured Jean that he had no intention of harming him. Jean admitted that he still didn't understand why they had been brought here, and the old man questioned him again about the game he had played in his world, seeking more details. Jean explained that there are many ways to play, but the point is that it's meant purely for fun. Nobody dies for real. That's why he couldn't understand the motives of the supernatural beings who abduct people from other worlds. Even so, Jean was confident that this game held immense opportunities. Death here wasn't permanent. Players who were eliminated would receive a rank and rewards corresponding to that rank. He believed the rewards would include items, skills, and martial arts learned within the game, just like the robe, abilities, and techniques he had acquired so far. As they talked, Jean and the old man discussed people struggling in life. Jean noted that this game was a huge opportunity for them. The old man, on the other hand, seemed like a true martial arts master with a life free of such struggles, possibly even with followers in his own world. Jean, by contrast, had little use in his world, which made him see this as a chance to gain power and survival advantages. The old man laughed heartily at Jin's words and complimented him, startling Jean, since their conversation could easily be noticed by others nearby. During their talk, Jean discovered that the old man didn't even know how to activate the map. Jean shared tips and tricks useful in this world and listened to stories about the old man's realm. Before they knew it, morning arrived. With the old man's guidance, Jean safely landed on the ground. Jean decided that staying close to the old man would be the best way to remain safe. The old man then asked if Jean wanted anything in return, admitting that he had learned a lot from him. Without hesitation, Jean requested to learn some of the old man's martial arts, determined to survive until the very end. The old man warned him that while learning martial arts was possible, attempting it could also be deadly. The old man explained to Jean that to truly succeed in martial arts, one must usually pay a hefty price. He asked Jean if he was prepared for that. Jean, confident, replied that no one dies here. The old man seemed to forget that for a moment, then decided that another method, now possible, would be used instead. To begin, the old man placed his hand on Jean to sense his inner energy. To his surprise, Jin's inner energy was weaker than that of the old man's house servant. Jean felt embarrassed and reminded him that he had already said there was no concept of martial arts or inner energy in his world. Undeterred, the old man instructed Jean to sit in a lotus position and again placed his hand on Jin's head. He warned that Jean would feel pain akin to death, yet he would not be able to move. He needed to endure it, or he would die. With all his senses heightened, Jean felt the wind on his skin like sharp blades. He could even hear ants crawling on the grass. Suddenly, pain surged through every fiber of his body. After struggling to endure it, Jean succeeded, opening his eyes. The old man praised Jean for his endurance and revealed that he had now fixed the flow of qi in Jin's body, fundamentally changing it. Curious, Jean asked what would come next. The old man explained that he had slightly separated Jin's soul and created an inspiratory gate in that space. Normally, people absorb the world's qi solely through breathing. Now, Jean had a second gate, allowing him to intake inner energy beyond ordinary means. Jean still didn't fully understand, so the old man elaborated. Humans consist of body, mind, and soul, all held together by qi. When someone dies, qi doesn't vanish. It disperses. Nature absorbs the dispersed energy, continuing the cycle of life. Yet those who do so become unstable, and eventually, the harmony of their yin and yang collapses, causing them to lose their martial arts or even die. The mind technique the old man taught Jean allows him to absorb scattered qi like this, increasing inner energy safely. The old man explained that if Jean could eliminate others strategically over the 100 days, by the end, his power would reach extraordinary levels. After the explanation, the old man prepared to leave. Before departing, Jean asked for his name. The old man introduced himself as Jang Dokian. The mind technique he taught Jean was called the White Martial Physique Arts. Jean expressed his gratitude, and Jang advised him to practice deep breathing, as it would further strengthen his body. With that, Jang opened the map and vanished like a true master, leaving Jean to continue leveling up with his newly acquired martial art. Following his plan, Jean moved to the edge of the limited area. Being transported by Jang to the center had been instantaneous, but walking there took half a day. Eventually, Jean reached a small town and noticed one house with its lights on at night. He considered the two possibilities. Either the house was empty, or a newbie had forgotten to turn off the lights. Jean cautiously entered and found it empty. He began looting, but only found useless items. Exhausted and realizing he hadn't slept since talking with Jang all night, Jean donned his hidden robe and finally rested. The next morning, the 5th day of Cloyd's survival, Jean was woken by voices outside his room. Alert, he grabbed his heavy crossbow, regretting his peaceful sleep. The intruder opened the door, thinking it was safe, but Jean was ready, aiming directly at him. The enemy blocked the arrow with his sword, forcing Jean to quickly fire daggers using black starchy palms. The enemy skillfully dodged and countered each attack, leaving Jean no choice but to charge. He forced the enemy to the ground, kicked the enemy's arm to make him drop his sword, and finally struck him down. Though the enemy pleaded for mercy, Jean knew they shared the same goal, survival. In this world, only the strongest could endure. After the recent player's death, Jean could finally perceive the chi the old man Jang had mentioned. It flowed into his body, flooding him with strength. Jean was stunned. Absorbing the chi of just one person made his body feel lighter and far stronger than before. Curious, he opened his status window and saw a new section called Inner Energy, which read only 20. He silently thanked Jang for granting him such an incredible gift. From that moment, Jean considered finding ways to gather chi without having to eliminate other players. Opening the kill log to check the remaining players, Jin's eyes widened in shock. Only 20 players were left, even though it had been just 5 days. At that moment, another player fell to Nam Sagwang, the infamous killer. The scene shifted to Nam, who looked disappointed at the fallen player. The player had approached Nam first, giving the impression of strength, but had failed miserably. Nam opened his status window and saw that 22 players remained. His gaze paused on Jin's name, which sparked a hint of recognition. Back to Jean, he realized the gravity of the situation. Nam had the most kills among all players. Jean knew he had to avoid him at all costs. He could barely handle minor fights, so there was no chance against Nam. Jean focused on finishing his farming before the restricted zone shrank further. From Orong's chest, the only valuable item he acquired was a refined troll's potion. The rest was useless junk. He reminded himself that if the opponent had had a stronger elixir or weapon, he might not have survived. Jean decided it was wiser to hide and survive until the number of players dropped. A week of cautious grinding passed, and Jean reflected on his early game luck. Most of his loot was insignificant, and he hadn't encountered many enemies since staying near the forest borders of the restricted zones. He was growing tired of eating werewolf meat. Now, on the 12th day of Cloyd's survival, only 20 players remained. Jean stood at the edge of the dangerous zone, reaching out his hand but wincing in pain. He knew he couldn't move freely there yet. For an entire week, the kill log had only recorded Nam relentlessly defeating other players. It seemed most players, like Jean, were hiding and playing it safe. As Jean traveled, he noticed smoke rising from the center of the zone, signaling a battle. The scene shifted to the fight. Multiple players had gathered, united with a single goal, to take Nam down. Calmly, Nam taunted them, effortlessly picking off even a lone player, remarking that it saved him the trouble of hunting them one by one. Since the players were ready to take Nam down, he knew they were also prepared to face the same brutal fate. After taunting them, Nam leaped into action, not to escape, as they expected, but straight onto one of the players, grabbing his face and taking it down in a single motion. The remaining players froze in shock, but Nam didn't pause for a second. He moved on, taking down the others with terrifying ease. The player count plummeted from 22 to 11, leaving Jean to wonder if Nam had some kind of hack. Nam casually remarked that the fallen players were weaklings who deserved to die. after leaving the area with the dropped chests, including a magic wand. That night, another elf arrived and immediately recognized the wand as belonging to Elizabeth, igniting a fury that made him swear an oath in the name of escrow to avenge her. Now, with only 11 players left, Jean realized that if he survived a little longer, he could break into the top 10. But after witnessing Nam's chaos, he knew that surviving a raid boss level player like him required powerful items. Determined, Jean explored the forest along the edge of the safe zone and discovered a mansion, likely to be outside the safe zone by morning. The perfect final spot for a serious farming run. Cautiously, Jean opened the mansion's door and was stunned by its grandeur. Inside, he found Royal Guard's armor, but his strength was too low to equip it. Frustrated, he continued exploring and discovered an elixir that boosts inner energy, sparking hope that he might gain inner energy without relying solely on chi. He also found a martial arts book containing the secret technique Unstoppable Fist. Like the Circle Stone, Jean knew he would need to spend 3 hours in meditation to absorb the elixir's power. While exploring further, Jean noticed an underground basement and paused, curiosity piqued. Suddenly, an explosion erupted nearby, forcing him to leap for cover and hide under the bushes. Confused, he scanned the area and spotted the elf from the waiting room, now engaged in a battle with Nam to avenge Elizabeth. Nam, unfazed, taunted the elf, claiming that silencing him would reduce him to nothing, and dared him to attack. The elf's determination only grew, ready to kill Nam. Jin's jaw dropped in disbelief. This whirlwind of destruction was just a kid. The elf Escrow, a master of spells, taunted Nam, warning him to see how long he could keep talking. Escrow unleashed a lightning skill, striking toward Nam, but Nam dodged effortlessly. Frustrated, Escrow demanded that Nam face him head-on, just as Nam had done with Elizabeth. Nam realized quickly that Escrow wasn't just talk. His skills were real, formidable, and unlike anything Nam had ever seen, even in Zhongyuan. Since Nam kept evading his strikes, Escrow prepared a final move, a lightning storm. Nam, though shocked, stayed calm and dodged every strike before leaping into the air to attack Escrow. Yet his assault couldn't penetrate Escrow's barrier. Escrow swung his staff to strike Nam, but it turned out to be an illusion. Suddenly, the burning battlefield and calm atmosphere shifted. Rain began to pour. Jean watched in awe, realizing just how insane Escrow's magic was. Not only could he almost kill Nam, but he could also manipulate the entire atmosphere as if it were nothing. Unable to detect Nam, Escrow concluded that Nam had escaped. He shouted Nam's name, vowing to track and kill him. Meanwhile, Nam, slightly injured, retreated to recover, already planning revenge for the next encounter. Escrow eventually descended and vanished, leaving no trace of Nam. Thanks to Jin's cloak of hiding, Escrow never noticed him, allowing Jean to survive another day. With both Nam and Escrow likely gone for a while, Jean turned his attention to the underground space he had discovered earlier, a potential dungeon hiding treasure. He opened the door and found nothing but stairs, leading him deeper underground. Using the lantern he had grabbed while farming, Jean navigated the path carefully, noticing that no one had been there before. At the end of the passage, he entered a room that appeared to be a food storage. Disappointed to find no loot or combat opportunities, Jean settled for the jerky inside. Having eaten nothing but tasteless jerky since arriving, he finally enjoyed the food, though he wished he had rice to go with it for better flavor. Jean decided it was finally time to consume the elixir. He retrieved a martial arts book from his subspace, a manual for the unrestrained fist. This technique had been developed by a man named Manpeja in his later years. With a lifetime of combat experience, he poured everything into creating an unbeatable martial art. But having lost all 1,429 matches, he lived as a laughingstock, and the art vanished without disciples. Reading the description, Jean briefly regretted picking it up, but he knew it was better than learning nothing at all. He returned the book to his subspace for later and focused on the elixir. Though hesitant because of the pain he endured activating the Circle Stone, Jean reminded himself that strength was the priority and drank the elixir without further thought. Instantly, he could feel his dantian filling with inner energy, far beyond what he had absorbed previously. His body began sweating profusely, and his movements grew sluggish. He wouldn't be able to move for 3 full hours. After enduring the time in complete stillness, Jean finally opened his eyes, utterly exhausted. Having survived a week in the forest unnoticed, including the intense clash between Archmage Escrow and Nam, Jean felt a rare sense of pride and allowed himself to sleep. The next morning, he emerged from the underground food storage, which was soon to become part of the restricted zone. Checking the kill log, he was shocked to see that the old man Zhang had been defeated as well. As the restricted zone closed in on the mansion, Jean grimaced at the thought of reaching the top 10 in such a precarious way. The map was already shrinking, and since he could survive this close to the border, he decided to continue the strategy that had kept him alive so far. With few combat skills, careful ranking through survival and stealth remained his best option. While rushing toward the safe zone, Escrow suddenly attacked with a massive fireball. Using his detection spell, Escrow assumed he had found Nam, but it was a new face, Jean. Terrified, Jean activated his newly gained inner energy to move quickly, but ended up running straight toward Escrow. Escrow confronted him, demanding if he knew about Nam, and warned that if he didn't, he would be killed on the spot. Unbeknownst to both, Nam was hiding behind a tree, silently observing the encounter. Jean tried to talk his way out, denying any knowledge of Nam, but the moment was shattered as Nam appeared in the sky, charging at Escrow. Despite the attack coming from behind, Escrow's defenses automatically activated. Escrow immediately noticed that Nam had fully recovered, leaving Jean stunned and wondering where Nam had come from. Determined to finish the fight quickly, Nam punched Escrow, but Escrow blocked it with his staff, claiming that such simple attacks could never harm him. However, in the next instant, the strike lands on Escrow. Nam was using enhanced energy, specifically arm energy, a rare martial art few had mastered. This was the first time Nam had to use it in this world, and Escrow was the first person to witness it. Nam's strikes injures Escrow, preventing him from chanting any spells. Even Nam couldn't deny that Escrow was worthy of top 5 status, possibly even winning the game. But now, with Nam's intervention, that was impossible. Watching the intense battle, Jean realized how lucky he was that Nam had arrived, and decided to sneak away while both were distracted. Nam continued striking Escrow relentlessly, as Jean observed the supposedly invincible Archmage get utterly destroyed. His thoughts weren't fear of Nam or pity for Escrow. It was a strategic calculation. If he could absorb the chi of both of them, he could become incredibly powerful. At the same time, Jean noticed a meteor falling from the sky, heading straight toward their location. Nam froze in confusion. Realizing the danger, Nam ran for his life, while Jean regretted not fleeing sooner. The spell struck the ground with devastating force. One of the black elves noticed it immediately, recognizing that Escrow had cast it. Jean, caught in the blast, was injured and deeply regretted his hesitation. With the last of his strength, he pulled out healing scrolls from his subspace, scrolls he had meticulously prepared for moments like this. Thanks to the elixir he had consumed earlier, Jean barely survived. Even after healing, pain coursed through his body, forcing him to use every remaining scroll to finally stand again. Opening the kill log, Jean confirmed that Escrow had truly died. He felt a twinge of regret for not absorbing Escrow's chi. But there was nothing he could do. There was still no word on Nam's status, leaving Jean tense. Moments later, he heard Nam's agonized cries. Running toward the sound, Jean found Nam, severely injured and desperately begging for healing scrolls. Nam pleaded, offering to make Jean the winner if he helped him, claiming he had no items and no martial arts learned here. Jean ignored the desperate pleas, retrieving a dagger from his subspace, intent on taking Nam's chi and items to become the strongest player in the game. As Nam finally fell, Jin's body absorbed the overwhelming surge of Nam's chi. He could hardly contain his excitement. Jean felt an immense surge of inner energy flooding through him. Meanwhile, other players noticed Nam's death, leaving only 8 players remaining. With the strongest player gone, chaos was about to erupt, and the remaining competitors would now run rampant. After defeating Nam, Jean suddenly feels an overwhelming surge of internal energy flowing throughout his body, making him feel powerful enough to face almost anyone. Believing that someone as strong as Nam would not bother collecting ordinary loot, Jean decides to open Nam's chest box. The moment he looks inside, he is completely shocked to discover several rare rings that massively increase agility, strength, stamina, and even magic resistance. Jean quickly equips the rings and realizes that Nam had been hiding his true wealth all along, collecting only high-quality items. As soon as he wears them, he can immediately feel the changes within his body. Curious, Jean opens his status panel and is amazed to see that all of his stats have increased dramatically. The boost fills him with confidence, making him believe victory is finally within his reach. Besides the rings, the chest also contains several martial arts books. Unfortunately, Jean cannot learn any of them because he lacks the specialized internal cultivation techniques required to use those skills properly. After collecting everything, Jean prepares to leave, but suddenly senses someone nearby. He immediately stops and scans the area for danger, but before he can react, an enemy launches a fire attribute attack toward him. The attacker finally reveals himself, convinced that Jean has already been killed, and mocks him for falling into such an obvious ambush. However, the enemy is stunned when Jean walks out completely unharmed, protected by the magic resistance ring. Jean calmly approaches him, causing the attacker to panic. The enemy warns Jean to stay back or face his strongest spell. He quickly begins casting another attack and unleashes a powerful blast of fire, but the attack still has no effect. Jean walks directly through the flames and activates the technique Peerless Fist Chapter 1. With a single devastating punch to the stomach, he sends the enemy crashing into a tree. Even Jean is shocked by the immense power of the technique because it had always seemed weak before. He quickly realizes that the incredible strength comes from his newly enhanced internal energy. The enemy dies instantly from that single strike, and a chest appears. Understanding that many hidden players were likely observing Nam's overwhelming strength earlier, Jean immediately puts his stealth cloak back on. He knows those people will now begin hunting for survivors. Using the lightness skill taught to him by the Elder, Jean leaps into the trees and continues traveling through the forest while silently expressing gratitude for the training he received. An hour later, Jean hides nearby while observing another participant named Stark. Stark loudly calls out to hidden enemies and pretends to offer alliances, claiming they should work together to complete the mission. In reality, he simply believes everyone is hiding because they fear him. Suddenly, an arrow flies towards Stark, but he reacts quickly and blocks the attack. Furious, Stark calls the attacker a coward and demands that he reveal himself. Watching from above, Jean wonders who fired the arrow. Stark, however, already seems to know the attacker's identity and calls out the name Juroquana. Moments later, Juroquana appears standing on a tree branch, prepared to attack again. Juroquana seems slightly surprised that Stark recognized him so quickly, but Stark immediately begins flattering him, calling him a legendary archer famous among mercenaries. Stark then attempts to recruit Juroquana, suggesting they team up and win the mission together. Hearing this, Juroquana laughs before calmly landing on the ground. Stark mistakes the reaction for agreement and continues praising himself, boasting about his reputation and insisting that Juroquana would never regret partnering with him. Juroquana quietly replies with a few words before suddenly stopping mid-sentence. Stark smirks to himself, convinced that Juroquana is an idiot. However, Juroquana suddenly begins counting, wondering if he calculated the timing correctly. Confused, Stark mocks him and warns him not to create too much distance during battle. He immediately charges forward and orders Juroquana to die. Just as Stark's attack is about to land, another arrow suddenly strikes him and kills him instantly. Juroquana finally reveals that he never intended to team up with someone as insignificant as Stark. His true goal is to quickly locate Jean. After saying this, Juroquana calmly walks away. Once he leaves, Jean quietly lands on the ground and absorbs Stark's mana. However, at that exact moment, Juroquana suddenly glances back, making Jean nervous that his stealth cloak may have been detected despite being supposedly undetectable. Jean immediately begins overthinking the situation, but it turns out that Juroquana was simply considering whether to loot Stark's chest before deciding it was not worth the effort. After Juroquana finally disappears, Jean lets out a sigh of relief and praises the archer's sharp instincts. At that moment, Jean becomes certain that Juroquana will eventually become his next major opponent. Jean continues exploring the forest while moving beyond the restricted zone, which is shrinking much faster than before. At this point, only 6 survivors remain, even though there are still 80 days left in the trial. This makes Jean wonder if the restricted area becomes smaller more quickly depending on the number of survivors remaining. After reaching a wide open field, Jean immediately decides to hide. He understands that fighting in such an exposed area would attract far too much attention from the remaining players. However, while searching for cover, a sudden attack flies directly toward him. Jean is briefly shocked, but he manages to dodge it with ease. From the nature of the attack, Jean quickly realizes it was a precisely targeted magic spell. What confuses him is how the enemy managed to locate him even though his stealth should have concealed his presence completely. A second wave of attacks follows immediately, this time far larger than the first. Jean instantly realizes that dodging every strike is impossible. Trusting in his internal energy, he uses the same technique again, extreme straight punch. The force behind his attack completely nullifies the incoming magic, leaving even Jean surprised at how powerful he has become. Knowing he must locate the attacker first, Jean leaps into the air and spots someone hiding within a tree. The enemy is visibly shocked because he poured all of his mana into the spell, only for Jean to erase it effortlessly. Jean attempts to warn the man about something, but before he can speak, another hidden enemy suddenly appears and kills the mage instantly. The newcomer had been concealing his presence the entire time and is clearly an assassin. Now only 5 survivors remain. Jean finally steps out and faces the assassin directly. The assassin already knows who Jean is and mentions that Jean is the man who defeated Nam, the strongest public enemy among the participants. He also reveals that every remaining player is desperately searching for Jean now. Hearing this, Jean immediately takes a fighting stance. The assassin appears extremely confident and rushes forward, ordering Jean to hand over everything before dying. Jean charges as well, but the assassin quickly overwhelms him with speed and precision. Fortunately, Jean coats his body with internal energy to protect himself from fatal injuries. Without that defensive instinct, he would have been killed instantly. The assassin praises Jin's resilience while proudly boasting about his own assassination techniques, claiming he has never failed a kill within darkness. Since this is Jin's first battle against an assassin, he carefully listens to the enemy's words. The moment the assassin mentions darkness, Jean suddenly thinks of a countermeasure. The assassin vanishes and reappears directly behind Jean for a lethal strike. However, when the blades strike Jean, it turns out to be an illusion. Jean had activated his stealth cloak as well and appears behind the assassin instead. Calmly, he tells the assassin that his stealth techniques are nothing compared to the cloak's abilities. Panicking, the assassin attempts another attack, but Jean can now track his movements perfectly. Before the assassin can react or say another word, Jean kills him instantly. With that, only 4 survivors remain in the entire area. Jean absorbs the mana from the fallen enemies and uses the healing scrolls they carried to recover from his injuries. Since the battle created a huge disturbance, he quickly gathers the loot and prepares to leave. While searching through the assassin's belongings, Jean discovers an unexpected treasure, a martial arts manual called Illusion Steps. This technique allows the user to create clones that can fight alongside them, with the number of clones depending on the user's internal energy reserves. Jean immediately decides to learn the skill and realizes how fortunate he was that the assassin lacked internal energy cultivation. Otherwise, the battle would have been far more difficult. Inside another chest, Jean also discovers a magic book called Carmen's Eye, a legendary detection spell capable of seeing through all forms of stealth. Unfortunately, Jin's magical capability is still too low to learn it. As he reads through the book, suddenly, someone attacks him from behind. Jin's instincts react immediately, allowing him to dodge the strike by tilting his head at the last moment. Before he can identify the attacker, another unfamiliar attack rushes toward him. Jin quickly realizes that this enemy is not Jiro Kwana, the divine archer. With no time left to evade, Jin focuses all of his internal energy into his fist and barely manages to block the attack. Seeing multiple attacks coming from different directions, Jin begins to suspect this is a coordinated assault. Moments later, another enemy appears behind him and complements Jin's strength before swinging his sword toward him. Jin narrowly dodges and quickly retreats. At that moment, Jin confirms the truth. He is facing a three-person team. All three enemies finally reveal themselves. The first is Senroku, the king of Hersen. The second is Garen, the right hand of the demon king. The third is the divine archer, Jirokwana. Seeing all three standing together, Jin is left completely stunned as he wonders how he can possibly survive this situation. Jin finds himself trapped in a desperate situation. The fastest way to survive would be to create conflict between his enemies and force them to betray one another. But there is one major problem. Jin knows nothing about their personalities or motives because he has never encountered them before. Garen calmly lands beside Jin and greets the king of Carson, Senroku. However, Senroku's pride immediately shows as he questions how someone like Garen dares to speak to him so casually. Garen simply smiles and apologizes for any disrespect, but he explains that survival matters far more than status in this place. He then proposes that they cooperate temporarily and kill Jin together in exchange for a greater reward. At that moment, Jin realizes their alliance was formed on the spot and not planned beforehand. Seeing this opportunity, Jin immediately activates his stealth technique. Senroku agrees to Garen's proposal and orders him to deal with Jin's stealth abilities first. In response, Garen casts a massive lightning spell above the battlefield, illuminating the entire area. The bright light instantly neutralizes Jin's stealth because there is no darkness left for him to hide within. Even Jin is impressed by such a clever countermeasure. Garen then reveals that he had actually wanted to thank Nam for killing Escrow, who had been a major obstacle for him. Now that Escrow is gone, Garen intends to kill Jin as well in the name of the great demon king. Without hesitation, Garen unleashes his technique, Dark Blade Storm. The moment Jin sees the attack, he immediately recalls that mages are usually vulnerable in close combat. He decides that his only chance of victory is to close the distance and finish the battle at point-blank range. Garen's attacks bombard him relentlessly, but Jin circulates as much internal energy through his body as possible to reduce the damage and push forward. The continuous assault damages even the cloak of stealth, while Jin's protective internal energy begins to crack under the pressure. Watching the destruction unfold, Garen confidently assumes Jin has already been defeated without a trace. However, to his shock, Jin suddenly bursts through the storm and charges directly toward him while using his fist technique. Instead of panicking, Garen calmly tells Jin to give up because victory is impossible. He then activates another spell, Chaos Deadman Hands, Touch of the Dead, causing countless hands to emerge from the ground. Seeing this terrifying technique, Jin immediately understands that Garen is on a completely different level compared to the mages he has fought before. Realizing brute force alone will not be enough, Jin activates Spirit Illusion Steps and creates multiple illusions of himself. Garen is visibly surprised and complains that Jin's techniques are becoming increasingly troublesome. Confident in his strategy, Jin charges toward Garen alongside his illusions. However, before Jin can land the finishing blow, Senroku suddenly betrays Garen without hesitation and strikes at him with his sword in order to attack Jin instead. As Garen fades away, he bitterly remarks that it is disgraceful for a self-proclaimed king to act so treacherously. Senroku coldly replies that victory is the only thing that matters and claims he never truly intended to cooperate with someone like Garen in the first place. He even thanks Garen for helping weaken Jin. Afterward, Senroku shifts his attention toward Jirokwana, calling him a long-standing nuisance to his army. He declares that the time has finally come for their duel. Jirokwana simply smiles and comments that the battle is not over yet. Confused, Senroku turns around to see what he means. The moment he does, Jin suddenly appears and lands a powerful punch that sends Senroku flying into a cliff. After striking him, Jin calmly states that only the strongest two remain now. Jirokwana admits that he truly believed Senroku had killed Jin earlier, only to realize it was another illusion. Jin has no interest in listening to more talk and directly challenges Jirokwana to fight. Instead of attacking immediately, Jirokwana laughs and asks why everyone is in such a hurry. He then points out that Senroku still seems to have unfinished business with Jin. To Jin's surprise, Senroku emerges from the rubble completely alive. He reveals that he clearly saw his strike land on Jin earlier and and cannot help but praise Jin's incredible abilities. Jin ignores the compliment entirely, removes his shirt, and tells both of them to attack him however they want. Still overflowing with pride, Senroku declares that Jin will regret forcing him to use his true strength. In the next instant, he launches an incredibly fast attack that barely gives Jin enough time to avoid a fatal injury. Senroku confidently claims that no one can surpass him when it comes to speed. Jin quickly realizes that the attack was aimed specifically at the ligaments in his arm to limit his movements. Senroku correctly deduced that Jin's strange techniques require the use of both hands. Although shocked by Senroku's skill, Jin refuses to give up. Trusting the internal energy within him, he unleashes the Black Annihilation hand technique and manages to wound Senroku's face. Immediately afterward, Jin uses a healing scroll to restore his injured arm. Senroku comments that Jin truly intends to struggle until the very end. He then admits that Jin has become worthy of forcing him to use his aura blade. Without wasting another second, Jin activates Spirit Illusion Steps once again and releases his full internal energy, creating multiple clones around the battlefield. Annoyed by Jin's endless tricks, Senroku still confidently declares himself the inevitable victor. As the two prepare to clash in an intense battle, Jurokwana calmly sits atop the cliff and tells them to hurry up and decide the winner already. Jin decides that it is finally time to face Senroku head-on. However, Senroku mocks him and tells him to stop talking and attack already. The reason for his impatience is simple. His aura blade can only remain active for 2 minutes, meaning he must finish the battle before time runs out. Jin is also in a desperate situation because his internal energy is nearly exhausted, so he wants to end the fight as quickly as possible as well. The two immediately clash in a fierce battle. Jin skillfully uses his clones to pressure Senroku while occasionally slipping and attacks himself. At one point, Senroku strikes down one of Jin's clone, believing he has landed a direct hit, but he quickly realizes something is wrong when he feels no resistance in his hand. Before Jin lands another punch, after taking another hit, Senroku assumes the real Jin attacked him, but Jin reveals the truth. Every clone created by Spirit Illusion Steps can attack just like the original body, making it nearly impossible to distinguish the real one from the fakes. Two clones rush towards Senroku together, but he reacts instantly, dodging their attacks and destroying both with his aura blade. He mocks the clones for their poor durability while the remaining copies continue surrounding him. Even after eliminating 2 clones, 5 more remain, while less than a minute is left before his aura blade disappears. Meanwhile, Jurokwana watches the battle from a distance with clear surprise. He never expected Jin and his clones to pressure Senroku this much. Realizing the situation is becoming dangerous, Senroku suddenly calls out to Jurokwana for assistance and promises him any reward he desires. However, Jurokwana calmly refuses to interfere and continues observing the fight. Jin closes the distance once again, dodges the aura blade, and uses palm fist to strike Senroku. Although Senroku blocks the attack, he immediately counterattacks and kills Jin, only to discover that it was another clone. The constant deception humiliates him further, causing his anger to explode completely. Determined to end everything at once, Senroku unleashes his full power. Watching this transformation, Jurokwana wonders if the legendary Emperor of Madness is awakening once again. Senroku swings his aura blade in a devastating attack and dares the clones to avoid it if they can. This time, the attack destroys several clones instantly, leaving only 2 remaining. Believing that one of the final 2 must be the real Jin, Senroku focuses all his attention on them. The clones attack together, but he narrowly dodges their strikes. However, another Jin follows up immediately and successfully wounds him. Senroku retaliates at once and destroys that clone as well. Now convinced that only the real Jin remains, Senroku locks his eyes onto the lone figure standing before him. The two charge toward each other for a final clash. Senroku unleashes his aura blade once more and completely overpowers Jin. Without giving him any chance to react, Senroku kills him. At that exact moment, Senroku's aura blade finally disappears. Completely exhausted, Senroku lets out a sigh of relief, believing the battle is finally over. He knows that if the fight had continued any longer, he would have lost everything. However, something suddenly feels wrong. He realizes that he never felt any impact when his blade struck Jin. Before Senroku can react, the real Jin appears behind him and lands the finishing blow, finally securing second place. As Senroku falls, his chest appears. Jin stands there breathing heavily and comments that he would have been in serious trouble if he had not exhausted Senroku's stamina with the clones first. Watching everything unfold, Jiro Kwana smiles in admiration. He admits that he never expected Jin to defeat Senroku. However, the moment the battle ends, Jiro Kwana immediately charges toward Jin. He thanks Jin for eliminating Senroku but coldly declares that, in the end, Jin will still die by his hands. Jin absorbs Senroku's mana. Although the amount is not overwhelming, he believes it should still be enough to face Jiro Kwana. However, the moment Jin turns around, Jiro Kwana has already fired an arrow at him. Jin narrowly dodges the attack and immediately activates Spirit Illusion Steps once again, creating multiple clones that charge toward Jiro Kwana from every direction. Watching the incoming clones, Jiro Kwana comments that Jin is relying on those troublesome techniques again. Suddenly, he laughs and fires directly at the real Jin without hesitation. The attack strikes perfectly, sending Jin crashing to the ground while all the clones disappear instantly. Jiro Kwana calmly lands nearby and smiles, saying he must make sure Jin cannot escape. He immediately follows up with another attack to pin Jin to the ground. Shocked, Jin asks how Jiro Kwana managed to identify the real body so quickly. Jiro Kwana simply laughs and replies that it was just a gut feeling. Jin is left speechless by the answer, but before he can react further, Jiro Kwana launches another attack to finish him and secure first place. In the next instant, Jin suddenly finds himself transported elsewhere. The system then announces the end of the Cloyd survival game. Jin immediately realizes that he completely gave away his position at the last moment. The system congratulates Jin for surviving as one of the final two participants and informs him that he has successfully qualified for the next game. In addition, he receives 140 reward points, including bonus points. Jin is surprised by the amount, but the system soon displays all the items he acquired during the game. The system explains that all acquired items can be purchased using reward coins. Jin immediately checks the price of Spirit Illusion Steps, only to be shocked when he discovers it costs 130 coins. He complains about the outrageous price, but before he can think further, the system announces a special gacha reward for the top 5 players. Since Jin placed second, he receives 2 chances. Jin becomes excited at the possibility of obtaining either the Cloak of Invisibility or Spirit Illusion Steps through luck alone. If successful, he could save a huge amount of coins. The first draw begins, and the item he receives turns out to be Escrow's necklace. Seeing this, Jin becomes incredibly frustrated and complains that he somehow received the cheapest item possible. Still, he refuses to give up because he has one final chance remaining. Jin prays desperately to every deity he can think of before activating the second draw. This time, the reward turns out to be Spirit Illusion Steps. Jin becomes overjoyed the moment he sees the technique appear. To him, it feels like he just doubled the value of his reward points. The system then transfers all of his obtained items and informs him that he may spend his remaining coins before being automatically returned to his world. Because he obtained Spirit Illusion Steps through the gacha system, Jin saves a massive amount of coins. However, there are still many tempting items available, making it difficult for him to choose. Realizing he cannot stand there forever debating, he eventually compromises and finishes shopping. After wishing him luck for the next game, the system teleports Jin back to reality. Jin suddenly finds himself standing in the exact same place where he had disappeared earlier. His backpack is still lying on the ground nearby. Even so, Jin knows everything that happened was real because the ring of subspace he obtained from Cloyd Survival is still with him. The moment he puts on the ring, all doubt disappears. After picking up his backpack, Jin begins walking home. Thus, his first game finally comes to an end. On the surface, it seems like nothing has changed, but Jin can clearly feel that his life has already begun transforming completely. Thinking back to the system's words about future games, Jin smiles and realizes that the TOEIC exam is no longer his biggest concern. Since another game is guaranteed to happen, he decides that he must prepare properly. In the next game, he vows to take first place. Gene returns to the small studio apartment his parents rented for him near the university. Originally, he was supposed to focus on preparing for school and studying for the TOEIC exam. But now, his entire attention is fixed on becoming stronger using everything he brought back from the game. After arriving home, Gene places his backpack on the chair and begins planning his training. During the first game, he spent most of his time running away while being weaker than everyone else. He refuses to repeat that experience again. This time, he intends to train seriously and grow stronger before the next game begins. Remembering the elders' teachings, Gene decides to begin practicing Chucky so he can gradually fill his Danjian with internal energy. The elder once explained that Chucky requires complete focus in order to naturally gather internal energy within the body. Back then, Gene jokingly asked the elder whether he could become as strong as him if he trained hard enough. The elder burst into laughter and called Gene incredibly bold. He then explained that everything depends on whether Gene turns out to be a genius or no. Even after cultivating for 4 hours straight, the amount of inner energy Gene accumulated was incredibly small despite the long effort. Eventually, he gave up and complained that it felt completely different from cultivating inside the game. At this rate, it would take years to build enough inner energy. Rather than wasting more time, Gene decided to focus seriously and organize the items he had brought back from the game. He pulled out the Iron-Free Fist manual from his subspace and wished he had access to more useful martial arts than this. Gene wondered if he would have to master the technique slowly through training, just like cultivating inner energy. However, the moment he opened the book, the system appeared and asked whether he wanted to learn the technique. Gene was stunned to realize that the game system also worked in reality. After learning the technique, he immediately tested it and discovered that its power was on an entirely different level compared to when his inner energy was full. Next, Gene took out Escrow's necklace, the cheapest item he had obtained. He remembered hearing that it was made of pure gold, so he bid it to check and confirmed that it really was genuine gold. Judging by the weight, he estimated it could be worth around 10 million won. Instantly, greedy thoughts flooded his mind as he imagined bringing back 10 more necklaces from the next game and becoming rich overnight. After that, Gene pulled out the Refined Trolls Potion, an item said to grant the drinker a healthy body for an entire year. Just hearing those effects made him realize how valuable it could be. At that moment, Gene truly understood that Cloyd survival could become an incredible opportunity for him. While thinking about all this, Gene suddenly remembered the terrible jerky he had been forced to eat in the game, and his stomach started growling. He immediately headed to a restaurant and bought the 5,001 set meal he could afford. Back in the game, this was exactly the kind of food he had desperately craved while chewing on dry jerky. The moment he tasted the rice, he became emotional and nearly cried from happiness while praising how delicious it was. The grandmother looked confused and told him to act more like a man. Gene laughed and replied that the food was simply too good. Flattered by the compliment, the grandmother warmly told him to ask for more if he was still hungry. During their conversation, Gene realized that time inside the game did not pass the same way in reality. After finishing his meal, Gene left the restaurant and walked through the streets while wondering when the next game would begin because he needed more time to cultivate inner energy before then. Suddenly, he remembered the ring of strength he had also brought back. He pulled it out from his subspace and wore it, curious whether the stat boosts would work in reality too. The moment he put it on, immense strength surged through his body. He tested it by jumping and was shocked to find himself leaping far higher than normal. Fortunately, nobody saw him because it would have caused serious trouble if someone recorded it and uploaded the video online. Since the game's stats clearly affected reality, Gene hurried home and pulled out the elixir of inner sight, the most expensive item he had obtained. Inside the game, drinking it had made him feel like his entire body was burning for 3 hours straight. Unsure what would happen in reality, Gene drank it anyway. The moment he swallowed it, steam starts to surround him. 3 hours later, the police arrived after an elderly woman called to report that her neighbor's doorknob had become so hot she could not even touch it. The officers awkwardly told her she should have called the fire department instead, but the old woman insisted it did not feel like a normal fire. After questioning her, the officers approached the apartment and discovered that the doorknob really was burning hot. They knocked on the door and ordered the person inside to respond. Finally, Jean opened the door and casually explained that he had a fever and simply turned the boiler up too high. He even pointed out that if there had really been a fire, the fire department should have arrived instead of the police. Concerned, the officers asked whether he needed an ambulance, but Jean reassured them it was only a minor cold and that rest would solve everything. Afterward, the officers left while grumbling about the old woman's report. Once the police were gone, Jean locked the door, sat on the floor, and admitted that he nearly died after drinking the elixir. If it were not for the White Supreme Banquet technique, he would never have been able to endure it. Unlike in the game, using these items in reality carried real risks. Still, the power of the Peerless Fist had increased dramatically compared to before. The next day, Jean headed to the public park for physical training, but it was already crowded with people. Because of that, he decided to return after sunset instead. While hanging upside down during training, he noticed a group of delinquent students entering the park. An elderly man tried to stop them and reminded them that smoking in the park was prohibited, especially for students. One of the bullies arrogantly replied that his parents did not complain about his smoking, so the old man had no right to lecture him either. Hearing such disrespect, the old man criticized the students' upbringing, which instantly angered the bullies and caused them to surround him. Just as one of the delinquents was about to strike the old man, Jean stepped in and kicked the bully away, sending him rolling across the ground. Jean coldly warned them that they should never raise their hands against elders. The very next moment, a much bigger student stepped forward and asked Jean if he had a death wish. Seeing the intimidating figure, Jean realized the situation was about to become troublesome.